Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Armchair Art Tours Garden Series. Thanks very much for joining us today. My name is Melanie Blake, and I'm the Director of Classical Pursuits. I'm here with Samantha Clark, Marketing Manager at Worldwide Quest, and of course with Wendy O'Brien, who will be taking you through the beautiful neighborhood, the Frida Kahlo's Casa Azul in the neighborhood of Coyoacan in Mexico City. So Wendy is a philosopher with more than 30 years of experience teaching and leading workshops in philosophy, art, and literature. She's also a keen gardener. I'll turn it over to Wendy in just a moment. I know many of you are familiar with the functions of GoToWebinar, but just for those of you who are new, there are a couple of functions we're going to use today. Depending on your interface, you might see the functions by name, like audio, or you might have a little icon, such as a microphone or a speaker. So to adjust your audio settings, you just need to click on the audio, the arrow next to audio, or on the audio icon, and adjust your settings as you see fit. Sometimes if there is a lag in the audio or a brief freeze, it's just usually a problem of local connectivity, and it usually resolves itself in a couple of minutes. The other main function that's useful today is questions. So again, this might be a question mark, or it might be the word questions. Tap or click on that function to expand it, and you can type in your question and send it to us. We are going to do a Q&A at the end of the broadcast. I also might be chatting out some supporting information as Wendy talks, and that should just pop up on your screen. If you do have problems, send us a question, and Samantha and I will do our best to help you. So I know we have a lot of familiar faces, but also some new faces. So for those of you who don't know Classical Pursuits, just very briefly, what are Classical Pursuits and Worldwide Quest? Well, we work together to organize literary and cultural trips around the world. We're not doing that right now for obvious reasons, but we are bringing you a lot of online programs. So this is the last part in the Armchair Art Tours Garden series, but our Thursday webinars will continue. Next week, I'm starting a two-part mini-series on the war that used up words, talking about literature and culture before, during, and after World War I. Lisa Passold will be back to do another virtual walk in Paris in June. And Wendy will also be back to do some nature walks that bring in painting as well. And that will be early in the summer. So keep your eye out for those. For a more interactive small group experience, we're also doing a lot of online webinars. Wendy has two, one on 20th century women painters, and another coming up on In Search of Paradise, which is a multidisciplinary workshop. We also have webinars on Charles Darwin, classics of Canadian literature, King Lear, and a whole lot more. Most of these are live right now, open for registration, and some will be adding this week and next week. So just take a look at our webpage, Classical Pursuits, online programs, and you can find all the information. If you are in a position to do any of our paid programs, we really appreciate the support. And thanks so much for attending today. That's enough from me. Over to Wendy.
Thanks, Melanie. And hello, everybody. And thank you, so many of you, for coming back for part 3 of my armchair art tours through some of the great gardens in the world. You know, we can't go to these places right now, but man, I'm so grateful, so very grateful for the artworks that we have that allowed us to travel from where we sit, from where we are at this particular moment. Today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to spend some time taking a look at Frida Kahlo's garden in Casa Azul. Now, Frida, well, when I talk about Kahlo, and I apologize if I say it wrong, I've been practicing, but Frida Kahlo's garden. When we think about Frida Kahlo, we don't tend to think about her garden We don't tend to think about the beautiful elements and aspects of her work. And part of what I want to do this afternoon is to maybe reorient us a bit around her artwork, around her creations more broadly. You see, generally speaking, I think when we hear about Frida Kahlo, what we think about is, well, things that, oops, things that look like this. We're used to seeing, for example, things like her self-portraits. We're used to thinking about her works in some ways of being incredibly self-absorbed. She painted herself over and over and over again. Or if we know about Kahlo, we think about it as, well, images like this one that are a little weird and a little strange. Oftentimes her works are associated with those of the Surrealists, people like Salvador Dali. And indeed, Andre Breton, the kind of leader of the Surrealist movement in France, he actually invited her to show with the Surrealists and launched her first exhibition. Now, if you don't know a lot about Surrealism, I thought that this particular quote is a good introduction. Surrealism is based on the belief in the omnipotence of the dreams in the undirected play of thought. When I think about surrealism, I have to be honest, I always think about this image from Salvador Dali. It's remarkable in the sense of it, all that it shows about a couple of things. First off, all that it shows about the Surrealist project, that what they were interested in, well, you'll notice the head has dropped forward in the notion of the dream. They gained that really from Freud. Dali was, fascinated with Freud's work and with his notion of the id, the ego, and the superego. Actually, he met Freud at one point in time. This particular image, I think, is so fascinating because you get Eros, you get the beautiful leg and the luscious arm that's pushing out. At the same time as you get Thanatos, you get the notion of death, that one arm that's pushing down, that's corpse-like. And you get the notion of what happens when we dream. All the drawers in this particular image come open, and you see the dirty laundry there coming out. Yeah, the Surrealists were interested in capturing on the canvas what was in the unconscious, to use Freud's term. Dali himself said that what he was painting were hand-painted, photographed dreams. I love that quote. It makes so much sense to me about what the Surrealists were up to, that they created hand-painted, photographed dreams. I often think about this image as well from Magritte, called the false memory or the false image. It's also another great one because it shows that the world on the inside of the eye, not the world that the eye looks out to, was key or important to the Surrealists. Now, Kahlo is often associated with the Surrealists, and I think we lose so much of her work because of that association. She herself decided not to do the solo exhibition or to be shown with, sorry, that's incorrect. She decided not to be shown with the other Surrealists at Breton's request. Instead, she said, I don't paint dreams, I paint reality. And I don't think that quote is taken seriously enough. She didn't want to be associated with surrealism. She was doing something different. And I think we lose something of her project, of her work, by too closely associating her with Magritte and with Dali and with Breton in turn. Yeah, I think there's an image of her that focuses on her self-absorption, on all her self-portraits, on her relationship with the Surrealists, on also the idea that, her work was always somehow sexual in nature. So I look at this work called The Flower of Life, something that we'll look at a little bit later in more detail. People have written long dissertations about the sexual imagery and elements of the work. And well, I think if we get too caught up with her interest in fertility and also in death, I think we again miss so much of what she was offering us in her art. And lastly, there's the idea that, that she always paints things that are painful to look at and painful to consider. Now that's true. She did say that her paintings carry with them a message of pain. But we can get so caught up with these ideas and these kind of frameworks or platforms for understanding Kahlo's work that we miss the best part. That we miss the best part of her painting. And that is, well, that at the end of the day, she said, we can endure much more than we think we can. In her work, yeah, we find those elements, but we find such a remarkable example of resilience and endurance, and I would say joy and beauty. And that's the element of her work that I think so many critics and so many curators have overlooked when they consider what she created. What she created in her garden, this is the beautiful Casa Azul, which we'll talk about more in a minute, and what she created actually on the canvas. This might be surprising to people. This is a very early painting done by Kahlo. It is so lovely and so beautiful. And look what she said. She said, I paint flowers so they won't die. I think it's that element or aspect of her work. What I see in paintings that look like this, which I know aren't as controversial, maybe not as sexy, maybe not as fraught with kind of Freudian psychoanalytic elements, but are so beautiful. I think works like this kind of get overlooked. Works like this one, which are a celebration of life, of plant life, of beauty. It's here, I think, in her canvases, on her canvases, that we see this other element or aspect of her work appear. We find this ability to endure. We find this ability to celebrate. And I think those elements and aspects are also clear here. Here in her beautiful garden. Now, this is a photograph taken of her garden, probably in the 1930s. I think it would be probably in the 1930s, maybe the early 1940s. This is what it looked like then, and this is a beautiful image of what it looks like today. Here we are at Casa Azul. As Melanie mentioned a few minutes ago, it's at Coyoacan in Mexico, in Mexico City. It is a remarkable place and space. And as I'll talk about a little bit later, so much of it today is the same as it was when Kahlo and Diego Rivera, her sometimes husband, would live there. It is a stunning, stunning study of her work, an interesting place to see a different side of Frida Kahlo's work, a different perspective from which we're going to try to approach it this afternoon, if you'll be patient with me. Now, if you've been with me during the other art armchair tours that we've done through some of the great gardens in painting and in word over the past few weeks, there's some elements or aspects that Kahlo shares in common with both Monet in his beautiful Giverny, and also with Vida Sackville-West at Sissinghurst and Virginia Woolf at Monk's House. Like Monet, Kahlo pays attention to the little things in life. She pays attention and she finds incredible beauty in the small things that populated her place and her space. I can't help but thinking that this collection of fruit, this interesting still life that often is overlooked in Kahlo's works in general, that this still life is so similar to Monet's water lilies. Okay, let's stop for a minute. It's painted in a different style and perhaps with a different purpose, but again, it's the focus on the little things. Look at the colors that are there. Look at the beauty of the fruit and that parrot in the background. Yeah, you know what? Like Monet, she paid attention to the little things. And as I mentioned, I think she found great beauty there. But there's other parts that remind me in her work of Vita Sackville-West and Virginia Woolf and what they found in their garden. If you were with me last week, we talked a little bit about their need to find a place. They needed and they made their gardens to kind of ground themselves in times of remarkable change. So interesting here in this painting called Roots by Kahlo, that she too grounds herself in a place or space. Perhaps even more telling in that regard is this painting called My Grandparents, My Parents, and I, that she created. Now, this is sort of Frida Kahlo's family tree that she's developed on a canvas. And you see her grandparents there at the top of the screen, one set of parents coming from Mexico, one coming, you'll notice over the sea, her mix of both European and Mexican heritage. You see her parents there. You see the fetus inside of her mother, which many assume is Kahlo herself. And then there's the small child sort of in the center of the canvas. Now, I'm going to take us a little bit closer there. This is a self-portrait that Kahlo did of herself as a young girl. And she's right there in the middle of the family garden. This is Casa Azul during her parents' time, during the time that they owned it. And you'll see the plants that she puts there. You've got the sunflowers, you've got a prickly pear tree, you've got a mock orange tree. You know, she understood that she was grounded, that this garden in so many ways grounded her. Like Monet and like Sackville-West and Woolf, Kahlo also was painting at a time of great pain and great tragedy. Now, if you remember, Monet painted those water lilies in 1914 as the bombs were falling, and Sackville-West created Sissinghurst during the time that, while her world, her individual or her personal world was full of change, and as the world entered the Second World War. Kahlo too painted during times of great pain. For her, well, it started when she was 18, and well, this painting called The Broken Column captures so much of the pain that she would suffer. When she was 18, Kahlo was in a traffic accident. She was on a trolley, and the trolley was sideswiped. And it's surprising that she lived at all. You know, from all the reports we have, it's remarkable that she survived. As a result of this particular accident, her foot was crushed, she dislocated her shoulder, her collarbone was broke, 2 ribs were broke, her leg was broken, but perhaps most horrifyingly, both her spine and her pelvis were each broken in 3 parts. What she does here is she depicts some of that pain. It's a remarkable study. If any of you have lived through chronic pain or moments of great pain, it is a telling portrait that she draws. Notice a couple of things about it. Notice the nails that go all up and down the arms. Notice the column in the center representing her spine, and actually there are all the breaks and fractures there. And I wish I could have done a better job and found a better image so that you could capture the tears coming from her eyes, because they're almost diamond-like. How hard it would have been to cry. Even tears would hurt when she was in such pain. It is a remarkable painting. I have to tell you, I had some time during an exhibition of Kahlo's work at the Art Gallery of Ontario to stand in front of this beautiful work. It was smaller, I think, than I would have expected, but it was oh so powerful. Oh, so powerful. And it's interesting to me to compare and contrast this portrait of her with that image of her that we saw a few minutes ago of her as a child in the garden. Notice here, well, take a look at the landscape or the background. Notice how barren it is. And notice these big kind of gaps in the orientation of the land. It's so interesting to me because I think often about this painting as probably one of the most articulate workings of the nature of pain. If you've ever been in great pain, you know that everything seems to disappear. All the beauty seems to disappear. Everything seems so barren. It's a remarkable work. And one, well, lots of questions about why she would paint her pain. I think perhaps one of the best explanations is that it was for her kind of cathartic. It was a way to, well, catharsis is to purge or to get something out of your system, to put it there on the canvas so she didn't have to live it here in her head or here in her heart. It was a way to let it go. And in letting it go and not holding on to that pain and putting it, like I said, in the painting on the wall. Well, the remarkable thing about that is it let her not keep it here. It gave her the opportunity to have space inside for other experiences, experiences of beauty and of joy. It's an incredible painting, as I mentioned, and one that speaks not only to her pain, but perhaps to pain that we understand as well. There's a theorist called R.G. Collingwood, and Collingwood wrote about something called the Formulation Theory. And in the Formulation Theory, he said, great artists, what they do is they sit down in front of a canvas and they paint the truth. And when they paint the truth of their lives, as they watch the truth of their existence unfold right there on the canvas, well, it somehow allows them to let go of those feelings. But that was only the first part of his theory. He said that great artists, what they do is, well, they tell the truth on the canvas and then they turn the canvas around and they show us and they ask us if we know what it's like. And I always think of Collingwood when I look at this painting because it seems so much to me what she does. She lived this pain and she dared to tell the truth of what it's like. And then she turns the canvas around, she hangs it on the wall in the museum and asks us if we know what it's like. And she doesn't do that for totally self-absorbed reasons. She does it because she wants us to know that she understands something. She asks us if we know what it's like. And when we say we do, we can kind of understand those nails and those diamonds. But then we feel like we belong. We're not the only one. Oh yeah, Kahlo's work, like we saw with Monet and with Vida Sackville-West and Virginia Woolf, was framed by pain. There was the pain from her accident. She said at one time that there were two accidents in her life. One involved a trolley and the other involved Diego. This was her on again, off again husband, Diego Rivera, the great mural painter. At his time and during his time, he was considered Mexico's greatest painter. Interesting now, the question is up, and it seems like Kahlo's work has, in some ways, shadowed his. Yeah, he was the second big accident that happened into her life. The second source of, well, great pain and also great joy. Whenever I think of the two, I have to say, I think about this painting, Self-Portrait as a Tuana. Here, Kahlo does her self-portrait in a traditional Mexican bridal outfit. And it's fascinating to me that she actually created this portrait, not as she was about to marry Diego Rivera, But instead, when she divorced him, she created it originally without the image of Rivera that you see between her eyes on her forehead. Originally, it hung without that image. As she was creating this work, following their divorce, Rivera would come back into the picture. He was, well, I don't even know what to say about their relationship. It was on again, off again, full of passion, both of love and of violence. And, well, originally she painted it, as I said, as a kind of a divorce painting, a kind of celebration. Maybe she was marrying herself once more, but, well, eventually she would take the painting down and she would add that image. And if you've ever been in a situation where, man, there's somebody and they're bad for you, and you know that they're bad for you, but you just can't get rid of them. They're right here between, you understand Kahlo's painting here. She would, shortly after the time that she put the image of Rivera there on her forehead, she would remarry him. Yeah, there were two accidents in her life, as she said, the trolley, and then there was Diego. There was another kind of, well, challenge that she was facing, another kind of backdrop to her paintings as well, another kind of pain that she suffered. And I think it gets best captured here in this work called The Two Fridas. Now, I have to tell you, this is one of my favorite Kahlo self-portraits. It's her dual self-portrait. And it came from, well, another kind of pain that she was experiencing across her lifetime. And during a particular time, the time she spent in Paris. She went to Paris and she was the talk of the town. Here she is. This is Paris photo. And you see this gorgeous photograph of her. And I love that she's sitting there with the reflecting ball beside her. Some of you may know the works of E.M. Escher. He has a great portrait of himself looking into a reflecting ball just like this one. And I can't help but think that Kahlo was in some ways literally mirroring that particular image. Yeah, Kahlo went to Paris, and as I mentioned before, she had a solo show that was arranged by Andre Breton. She was the talk of the town for her artwork, but also the talk of the town because she was so beautiful and something unique. There was something about Frida that called out to the popular culture that, well, brought her into the realm of celebrity as well as the realm of being a great artist. Paris loved Kahlo. And, well, I think she felt that pull. I mentioned earlier, Breton asked her to exhibit with the other surrealists when her individual show finished. And as I said before, she said, I don't paint dreams, I paint reality. She refused it. There was something that she couldn't quite accept because while she was caught up in the European world, while she was the darling of the French art world, she also felt the pull of Mexico, of her family, of place. And so if you think about that, then I think looking at the two Fridas, it gives you insight into some of the pain that she faced. You see, there's two of her, one dressed in a traditional Mexican dress, a beautiful blue and kind of golden, kind of green colored traditional Mexican dress. And on the other hand, you have that white, much more, look at the lace all the way up, almost with a Victorian kind of European image. You see, there were two Fridas. One part of her was being called to the European world, and one part of her is being called to her Mexican heritage and culture. And, well, notice that thin artery that connects the two. And in her hand, the European Frida, as it were, in the white dress, she holds a scissor, almost as if she's getting ready, almost as if she knows that she must somehow sever these two parts. One part of her was in Mexico, one part of her was in Europe, and the two just didn't quite fit together, and she would need to decide who she was. She would need to decide where she belonged. And I think many of us can understand that. Many of us have felt the pull of two worlds within ourselves, and that feeling that sooner or later we had to choose. Now, it's fascinating to me that this duality, these two Fridas, are also captured in these photographs taken of her in her garden. Again, we get this duality, two versions. You have the very European dress, but if you look in the background, there are images and trees that were part of her garden, and the two Fridas over and over again that we see in her paintings. We see it in her paintings, we see it here in her photograph. I think too we see it in her garden. Some of the plants in the garden would be very European in their orientation. Some of them would be imported, and some of them would be native. In the garden itself, in its very structure and in its very construction, this struggle that she was constantly facing between these two worlds also gets enacted. In these ways, I think that we can draw all kinds of parallels to her garden and that of Monet and that of Sackville West, that in these places, in these spaces, we see pain and a response to pain, a way to deal with the pains on a big platform and the pains on a smaller platform, the pains of the world and the pains of the individual being acted out. But I think what we miss oftentimes with Frida, I think we sit with the pain. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. We sit with the pain and we miss the other elements or aspects. Frida said that at the end of the day, we endure much more than we think we can. And that's the part of her work that I see in her garden and in her canvases that we overlook. We forget what she said. She said, I tried to drown my sorrows, but the bastards learned how to swim, and now I am overwhelmed by this decent and good feeling. So caught up in the sorrow in Frida's work, which no question is there, but so caught up in the sorrow in her work, we miss the good feeling. We miss the celebration in her work. I see it. I see it there in her garden. Now, here her garden is when she and Diego Rivera first took possession of it in the 1930s. It was originally Kahlo's family home, but when they were married for the first time, when they were married, her father gave the house, signed the house over to the two of them. When they originally received the property, it looked very different than it did today. You see, her father had imported all kinds of plants and flowers to create the garden. I was thinking about these geraniums as a good example of things that are brought in or imported. Yeah, he brought in roses, he brought in ferns, he brought in palms. But as Frida took it over, she decided that she wanted to include more native plants. So as those plants died off, or as she got tired of them, she would replace them with plants like this. This is a Mexican marigold. Glorious, glorious celebration of color. And she put in the Bougainvillea, a Bougainvillea which actually very carefully gardeners over the years have maintained. She filled it with gorgeous fuchsia, like these ones here. Yeah, her gardens, she slowly transformed from a more European orientation to something more indigenous, something that recognized Mexican culture and Mexican plant life, Mexican history. Now, that's part of both her and Rivera's interest in the revival of Mexican culture as part of the Mexican Revolution. Now, flowers, flowers everywhere through this garden, spectacular and beautiful, and oh, so incredibly bold in their coloring. Many commentators have noted that perhaps she grew so many flowers to support her habit of wearing flowers. It's hard to see a photograph of Kahlo where she doesn't have flowers of some sort or other in her hair. We see it here in the photos, also throughout her paintings, always wearing flowers. The garden that she envisioned, the garden that she recreated, she also added a lot of cactus. These are called old man cactus. And there were also organ cactus that she put in place. I love these. These are one of my favorite. I love this image. I love organ cactuses. I understand exactly why they're called an organ cactus, right? Like the pipes going on. She would incorporate these kinds of cactus, these native Mexican plants into her work. She would also plant yams, and these are elephant ears, and all kinds of philodendron. She was really interested in the basket flower, which is a variation on a philodendron. It had lots of significance to Aztec culture, and so she tried to incorporate it into her garden. There were all these plants that she added, as well as things like yucca and prickly pear and agave. And she created a garden that looked like this. Oh yeah, the roses, some of the roses would stay, and a few of the ferns would stay, but she slowly replaced that European element or influence that came from her father with native plants. And she would also change the structure of the garden itself. She would create this kind of series of rectilinear courtyards filled with a variety of plants. They kept on building on. In the 1930s, they would buy another piece of land, she and Rivera, and they would keep on building the garden. It kept on expanding. Now, lots of people have asked me before about how much of a role these artists played in the creation of their garden. Well, with Kahlo, we know she had a lot to do with, first off, the design of the garden itself. I love this drawing. It is beautiful and lovely and whimsical. And again, we see a part of Kahlo that, because of her association with surrealism and with pain and just with sexuality and fertility, all those things, a part of her work that we often see missing, foregrounded here. Take a look at the little animals, the tiny little sketches she drew throughout the bottom of this drawing, of this plan for what their garden would take a look like. I love it. Here she says, "My house is not so comfortable, but it is nice of color." And that's an I at the bottom that we see. She was involved in the literal construction of her garden at Casa Azul. But beyond that, she took part in a lot of the day-to-day activities. You know, she was out there digging, and she was out there participating, growing these elements or aspects, these plants and these flowers. And she knew a lot about horticulture. In her collection of books at Casa Azul, we found a lot of books on botany, a lot of books on gardening. And she knew a lot as well. It comes up in this, a portrait of Luther Burbank. Now, I have to say, I've read many kind of descriptions and discussions, curatorial notes on this particular painting by Kahlo. It's often considered her first surrealist painting. If you adhere to, I guess, that particular interpretation of her work as a surrealist, but I never spent time thinking about who Luther Burbank was, or why he's holding the plant, or why she would be painting this picture of a California botanist. So I went and did a bit of hunting, a bit of research, and I know it's kind of a hard, difficult to see image coming from the Eddie. But here is Luther Burbank. He was a very well-known, very prestigious horticulturalist. We get the Idaho potato because of Luther Burbank. And we also get Shasta daisies and elephant garlic. Were all things that he developed in his greenhouses. And he was really well known in California, in America. But Diego Rivera came to know about him because he painted a mural in California of great Californians, and he included Burbank. Indeed, Burbank was so important to both Rivera and to Kahlo that, well, you can see a cypress tree behind this portrait of the two. This is a picture that was taken of them while they were in California. It was a picture taken of them when they went to visit Luther Burbank's widow, and Burbank himself is buried at the base of this particular tree. Yes, he was an important Californian, and yes, Rivera painted him into his mural, but I think he had other kinds of importances for them. And I think this particular photograph really points out how much Kahlo and Rivera, how devoted they were to their gardens and to gardening more generally. Yes, there is a surrealist element. You may note the skeleton at the bottom, but I think she was also talking something about the cycle of life, that things grow out of what has died. And that is, by the way, a philodendron in his hands. He was well known for some of his cultivation of philodendrons, plants that you'll see at Casa Azul. Yeah, it's sort of a beautiful kind of, I guess, meditation or appreciation of horticulture, of growing, of what goes into creating something like a garden. Yeah, Kahlo, she planned the garden and she worked in the garden and she knew a lot about gardens. She painted elements and aspects of it all the time. I have to say, when I look at this painting, which I have to say is one of, not painting, this photograph, which I have to say is one of my favorites of Kahlo. As I see her, using the paintbrush, dabbing so gently, when I see her concentration here, I think about this image as well. There's a similarity in their approach to both the canvas and to gardening. Now, Kahlo was a painter, and she painted no question, and she painted no doubt, not despite all the pain that she had suffered, but in light of it. She said that I'm not sick, I'm broken, but I am happy to be alive as long as I can paint. And the things that she would paint, elements and aspects, not just of the sorrow, but of the joy in her life. So filled with, elements and aspects of the garden. Now, this is Kahlo's diary, and it is a remarkable book. I have a copy of it sitting right here beside me. It's one of my most precious possessions. It is a unique diary in the sense that rather than just write her thoughts and words as most of us do when we keep such a book, she actually painted her diary. It's so incredibly beautiful. It is a painted look at her inner life. And on those pages and throughout those works, we see her while dealing with landscape, her images and ideas getting a first formulation on these pages, and with animal life. And I have to tell you, throughout, there are these beautiful little drawings of leaves and plants. It's a remarkable look at the development of her ideas about painting, her ideas about herself, her ideas about struggling with pain, and her ideas about finding joy. This image from the cover, I particularly love. This image of her as a kind of angel, or perhaps she's growing out of a plant. I'm not sure, but I think it's so indicative of so much of her work. Yes, she would spend time thinking about right from the beginning. In her earliest works, her earliest entries in the diary, she was fascinated with the natural world. And she would paint. She would paint works like this one. Now, as I mentioned before, I think a lot of the sensationalism around Kahlo's life has led us to somehow overlook elements or aspects of what she was doing, to overlook her ability to endure and her ability to find good feeling, to use those quotes from earlier. Yeah, this is Frida Kahlo, but a Kahlo that is rarely known. It's probably one of the earliest paintings of hers that we have, and it's roses, probably roses that her father had grown in Casa Azul. It's a lovely, lovely work. And it's also important in terms of recognizing the expanse of her work, that she knew about painting, that she was in conversation with some of the great masters of the still life. But we see it here. We also see works like this one, and this is my favorite from her early kind of works. This is called Small Life, not Still Life, but Small Life, which she created, and interestingly, a watercolor and not an oil painting. It's so beautiful and so lovely, simple, and focusing on the elements and aspects of the world around her. And that was one of the things about Kahlo that I think sometimes gets overlooked. She had this remarkable ability to observe not just the big things, but the little things around her. It's an example of kind of her positivism. We see it here, and then her interest in plants develops over time. It gets more complicated, more entwined with other ideas about the workings of the world. Here's called Sun and Life. And again, notice the roots that we saw earlier. Notice her looking for ground, the elements of new tendrils coming up and through. We see it in works like this one as well. It's true. Kahlo painted herself often, and we tend to focus on her and not the things that are on or around her. In this particular work, we see her in nature and flowers, again, probably from her garden, adorning her hair. If you look into the background, you'll see that there are leaves that look like some of the philodendrons, perhaps that we saw before, or the elephant ears that she grew in the garden at Casa Azul. Yeah, there's more to the work than just her face. There's more to the work than just her suffering. There's also life surrounding her, and life adorning her. They are remarkable examples. Here we have another. Again, look at the background, very much planted or grounded in her world. And yes, that is one of her two monkeys that she kept with her. It's interesting to me that she is so much part of the natural world, not separate and distinct from it, but she incorporates herself into it in a way that she seems to blend right in. Notice the colors of her hair, maybe reflecting the leaves, but it's almost as if she's part of that greenery. She's part of that world that she's painting. It's not man versus nature. It's not woman versus nature, but woman and nature. You see it here. You also see it here in her, probably the most famous work that she did, her most famous self-portrait, called Self-Portrait with a Thorn Necklace and a Hummingbird. Now, this work has been exhibited and been the topic of much discussion over the years, often translated as a study in pain. I want us to think about it a little bit differently. Again, to try to give I guess the best way to explain it is a new lens or a new focus to Kahlo's work, to see the natural elements, the garden elements, that are in it, and to rethink perhaps what she was telling us about pain and suffering, but also about joy and transformation. Now, this particular painting, many scholars have spent lots of time discussing the various elements associated with it. The monkey, many people have said, is a symbol for evil, and the panther, I know it looks like a cat, but it's supposed to be a panther. The panther on her other shoulder for wrongdoing. The hummingbird, which it took me a while to see, and maybe that's just me, but if you look around her neck, there's a hummingbird that's hanging, that's attached. And the dead hummingbird was supposed to bring back a great love. We can look at these elements and aspects, and of course, of the literal thorn necklace, recalling the trials and the torture that Christ bared, that she's imposed on here. Those elements and aspects are often focused on, but you know what we overlook is we overlook the foliage behind her. Here we have, leaves clearly taken from some of the examples from her garden, copied from some of the things she had growing around her. We overlook the elements of life and persistence and endurance, focusing instead on the dark elements, literally the dark elements in her work. The other things that we don't look at too carefully are, take a look at her headdress. She doesn't have flowers on her head this time. She doesn't have her crown that she normally wore, but there are butterflies there. And I wish we could do a better job. I have to say, this is one of the most discussed of Kahlo's self-portraits, and at one and the same time, the hardest to reproduce. I spent so much time trying to find a clear reproduction, and what I really wanted to do was to be able to zoom into the dragonflies that are at the top of the painting. So if you follow those leaves all the way to the top, you'll see two dragonfly images up there. And I have to say images because they both have flowers in place of heads. One has a zinnia and one has a fuchsia in place of where the head of the dragonfly would be. Now, why am I spending so much time talking about the foliage and the butterflies and dragonfly? Well, it's almost as if Kahlo, in painting this work, yes, she recognized all the dark, all the struggle, all the pain, all the sorrow. But if you don't look at the top part, you miss the possibility for transformation and the possibility for joy that she's offering in the exact same image. There is darkness and there is light. There is struggle and there is endurance and resilience. There is all that was and all that we have the chance to be. It's one of the things I so admire in her works, these constant dualities, this constant taking us from the darkness into the light, that I think in dark times it's hard for us to see, but oh so important for us to appreciate. There are many self-portraits that she created using as the backdrop images from her garden. Here's another one. This is from the Met, and I actually love it on the blue walls as it is at the Met, with her monkeys. Again, she blends into kind of the natural background. You see the beautiful flower that's there, the celebration of the natural world. She painted other images involving elements or aspects from her garden as well. Elements or paintings that showed she wasn't naive about the change that was taking place. This work, which is called Self-Portrait on the Borderline Between Mexico and the United States, is, well, I've spent so much time looking at this and the different aspects of it and what she incorporated into it. So you see on the one side, you see Ford actually written there on the smokestacks. You see the big towers that looks like it might be New York. You see the industrial elements or aspects of it. You have Kahlo herself there in the middle, and then On the other side, you see all kinds of elements and aspects of both Mexican and pre-Hispanic culture, as well as elements from Kahlo's own life. You'll see the structure in the background. Take a good look at it, because we'll see a replica of it that's actually in Kahlo's garden herself. It was put there by Rivera, who's really interested in, as I mentioned, pre-Hispanic kind of sculpture. But then look at the forefront as well. Look at all those flowers, so many of which grew in her garden, either in her garden during her time or in her garden during her father's time managing it. And look at the roots and look at how deep the roots go versus look at the wires for all those technological innovations that you see on the side of America. She wasn't naive. She knew times they were changing and that her culture was under pressure, and that the life that she envisioned in and through her garden was being threatened as well. Again, if you have a chance, spend some more time taking a look at this work and think about how times they were changing for her and how they changed for us, and how our relationship to the land and to the plants change at the same time. This is another remarkable work that she created, a work that focuses, I think, on the interdependence and the unity of herself. You have Rivera there, you have the goddess above, you have a face in the clouds, but look at all the plants and look at the roots going down. It's the work is called The Love Embrace of the Universe, the Earth, Mexico, myself, Diego, and Senor. Senor is the little tiny calf that you might see on the hand on one side. You'll see him kind of cuddled in there. She knew something about the interconnection that we have with the environment. I often think that this would make a great cover for a more recent look at our interconnection with nature, to spawn us to rethink about the role that nature plays in our lives and us in the lives of nature, to think about what we've done right and where we've gone wrong. And I love that these are plants and flowers that she knew so well, plants and flowers from her garden that she uses. It is a different Kahlo I'm asking you to consider through her use of nature and flowers here. Not so much the Kahlo of sorrow, not so much the Kahlo of pain, but well, I guess if I had to think of the painting I most think captures this side of Kahlo, the painting that I've learned to appreciate, if not just as much as her paintings of pain, her self-portraits. It's this one, The Flower of Life. And I love its celebration of the natural world. I love its celebration and recognition of what plants can teach us about life in and of itself. The use of color here, the planet in the back, the lightning, the fireworks that are there. A different Kahlo on the canvas today. A Kahlo of life, not death. A Kahlo of celebration, not just of despair. And I think that this idea that the garden was a place, the plants were the place where she felt that. I think it's evidenced in her paintings. I also think it's evidenced in the photographs she had taken of herself. We have so many photos of her. This is a great collection. If you have a chance to get to the library, or some of you may want to purchase it, support independent booksellers if you have a chance. It's called Frida Kahlo, her photos. And it's a fascinating look at the places and spaces she was photographed. She was so beautiful and so elegant that she allowed photographers to take her picture over and over and over again. And I guess looking through the photos for today, I noticed something I guess I had overlooked previously, and that is how often she had herself photographed in her garden at Casa Azul. Uh, Take a look at this amazing, amazing picture of her, and look at the lushness, and look at how many of those plants that you see behind and around her we saw on the canvas. She is, I think, her most beautiful when photographed in her garden. She is so elegant. Again, another picture of her at Casa Azul that was taken. Or look at here, and there you go. There's Senor. They're in the foreground. Again, a couple of things that you notice in this photo. You see the old palm tree that was there, that was planted by her father, but then you see, looks like a yam plant beside it. This mixture of the old world and the new world, and her standing almost right there between them. This integration, or maybe it's a struggle between these elements or aspects of her own identity that are literally grown right into the garden she creates, grown into the house and the home that she develops. There are these photos of her in her garden, but then there are also the remarkable photographs taken of her by Nicholas Murray. I think many of us might be familiar with these amazing photos. Murray, her one-time lover, photographed her so beautifully. And there, do you see? Those are my favorite in behind her. Those are the gorgeous organ cactus that she planted at Casa Azul. And here she is, and that's her Bougainvillea, flowers from her Bougainvillea. I was hoping mine was going to bloom. I've got blossoms on it, but they haven't broke open quite yet. I've been nurturing my Bougainvillea, my Frida plant, in my sunroom throughout the winter. It goes out in the summertime, but it suddenly decided, around about 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago, to develop blossoms. And mine is the exact same color, which I'm always so excited to see, this kind of bold color. But there she is again. You see the blue wall, that indigo color wall, the azul of Casa Azul, and you see this celebration, and you see her so beautiful, so much herself in her own place and space. Another photo taken by Murray, and there you have the fuchsia from her garden in her hair, and you have the beautiful dress that she's wearing with the tiny little daisies on it. Yeah, there was something about the garden for her. You know, she wore it in her hair all the time. She painted it into her canvases. She seemed to be, well, I guess when I look at this photo and I think of those images of her garden, or that incorporate elements of her garden that we've seen in her painting, I can't help but think that in some ways it was in and through her garden that she found her better self, her most beautiful self, where she wasn't able to, just revel in her pain, but to find great beauty as well. Now, the Kahlo would not live particularly long. The accident that she had as an 18-year-old left her in chronic pain. She would grow old in her garden. She would grow old too young, suffering under the physical elements, the physical struggles with her body. For much of her life, she had worn a body cast. And here she is. She used to paint the casts. And if you ever have a chance to see, or if you ever hear about the casts being on display, they are these remarkable images. She painted her life and herself right onto her casts. Incredible. I don't know how she thought of doing that. But again, this idea of, I'm not going to just succumb to the pain, but I'm going to use it as a canvas and turn it into something different and something else. Yeah, she lived with a lot of pain, especially towards the end of her life. The last 10 or so years of her life must have been horrible. In 1953, her one leg would be removed, it would be lost to gangrene. But it's so interesting what she would say. She said, "Feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly?" Again, a quote I bet nobody would have guessed would come from Kahlo. Not the reveling in pain, but the celebration of what we do, what we can do out of it. I think she knew. I think she knew for a long time that death was approaching her. Some of her late paintings, like this one, make it clear. But again, notice some things in it from her garden. Notice the bouquet that the skeleton holds. And notice the plants that encompass her and the roots going down. Kahlo would paint, and she would paint, and she would paint. Even when she became bedridden during the last years of her life, she figured out a way with help of friends, excuse me, with the help of friends, to allow her to continue. Sorry, to allow her to continue to create works of art. I'd like to say that I got choked up there because I swallowed wrong, which is part of it. But when I think of her going through all these dark times and still creating, you know, not giving up, not surrendering to the pain and to the darkness, but continuing to work, I have to say I choke up a little bit emotionally, as well as having swallowed the wrong way. Now it's interesting, towards the end of her life, she would go back to painting these kind of still life images I showed you examples of a bit earlier on. It was a celebration of life and of death in these works. It was a celebration of the little things. And what I think often goes unnoticed and unrecognized is such a celebration of color. You know, right at the very end, she returns to still life. She returns to painting life, to painting plants, and to painting fruit. Now, she would die in 1954, and the nation would mourn for her. But I can't help but going back to that quote from earlier from her, from this idea that at the end of the day, we can endure much more than we think we can. Because not only do I think we see it in her work, in her painting, not only do I see it through her life, but I find it in her garden. Here's an image that I find particularly poignant. There's her bed in behind. This is at Casa Azul. It's a fairly recent photograph that's taken in. I always think about the fact that this was the bed that she would be confined to, and that this was the place that eventually she would die. And she's right there looking out at her garden. She's right there still, somehow, as best she could, perhaps, engaged in the fullness of life, in that luscious garden that, well, today, this is what it looks like. Now, the garden, which has been kept, the head gardener right now is Umberto Spindola. The garden, to a great extent, has been kept as it was when Kahlo lived there, and Rivera during their various times on and off again. They've tried to keep the same plants in place. They've tried to keep the trees growing. They spend a lot of time maintaining the same elements and aspects. I told you I love them. I couldn't help one last photo of them. And here you see, do you remember that structure we saw in her painting? It was a structure that comes from the Aztec tradition, and Rivera had it built here at Casa Azul, and so interesting to see Kahlo emulated in her painting from earlier, the painting of her at the border between Mexico and the United States. And notice all the color throughout these images. One of the great things that I've learned from spending time taking a look at her amazing garden is my great love of pots. She was big into using pots to allow for diversity of plants, and some of us with strange weather patterns these days can, I'm sure, appreciate what she created and the model that she offers. Oh yeah, you know what? There was a lot of sorrow in her life. But you know, to not look at these gardens in their beauty, to not appreciate the plants that she created, the time that she created, to not think about how this is what she looked at during the last days of her life, well, I think is to not give her her due, to not understand that for her, the garden was many things. It was a place to find beauty, a place to feel grounded, and ultimately, I think, a place where she could see herself, her better self, reflected. And where, how interesting for a woman who said that, you know, we can endure most, where her legacy today, where all that beauty continues to endure. Yeah, a bit of a different take on Frida Kahlo today. Not the dark Frida, but the Frida of life. Not the Frida of pain, but the Frida of endurance, of surviving in dark times. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm going to turn it over to Melanie.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Let me turn my camera back on. If I can, let's see here. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much. That it's really incredible to learn about this other aspect of Frida and her lifelong connection to her garden. And so again, people can ask questions through the question function. We're going to take as many questions as we can and type in your question. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. Let me just open up the question field again. And while we get set up, a couple people are asking if you can visit Casa Azul. Yes, you can. We've actually done I've led a classical pursuits trip to Mexico, looking at the works of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and reading the poetry of Octavio Paz. And it's a really cool place to visit. And a couple people wanted to know, Wendy, if you had visited it and what you thought.
Oh, you know what? It's stunning. Yes, I have, and it's stunning. And I have to say, when we talked about doing garden tours, you know, it's easy to do Giverny, and Sissinghurst, you know, is right on my horizon. But I have to say, the first garden I thought about was the one at Casa Azul, because I think it surprised me. You know, it really did give me a different view of Kahlo's life. You know, I had been so caught up in the darkness and in the pain and in the struggle, and I'd been so caught up with her politics, her relationship with Trotsky and with communism, the Mexican Revolution, her desire to reinvigorate Mexican culture, that I think there was this element of her life that I really had overlooked. And that was, as I mentioned, that, you know, she could see the pain, but she tried to celebrate the beauty as well. Like, she wasn't going to just sit there and live with it. I think that that's one of the reasons I love that portrait of her with the thorn necklace, that as you go up it, you know, you see life instead. The gardens are remarkable, full of color. And like I said, the head gardener tries to keep the plants to the plants that Frida and Diego had in their original garden. You can go online and find all kinds of lists of the various plants that they put in place. The one plant that I know that remains is the Bougainvillea. The Bougainvillea is carefully nursed, and it's the original plant that Kahlo had put in place there. And yeah, every time I see that crown of gorgeous Bougainvillea, you heard me, I swoon. I can't help but swoon a bit that, you know, she grew them in her garden and she decorated herself with them as a celebration of life. And I think it really does warn anybody interested in her work to go there and see this very different from, you know, the biographies, different from the movies, a very different side of her. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a really, the neighborhood itself is the neighborhood is also so green and lovely. Like it's this really kind of oasis in Mexico City. A wonderful place to visit, I think.
You can see both Melanie and I full with big smiles, right?
Yeah,
Just thinking about it.
yeah,
It's, you know,
loved it. And
and
also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Wendy.
no, please go ahead.
The house of Diego Rivera's family in Guanajuato, which is a couple hours from maybe 3 hours from Mexico City. Not as much gardens, but also in a very colorful city, and like with all these interior courtyards, and also a very interesting and worthwhile place to visit.
Yeah, and one
Um,
of the things we didn't do here is we didn't look at the difference between the depictions of the garden and of plants and of nature in Rivera's work and in Kahlo's work. I think there is a striking difference between them. And well, we're taking a look at some of the images we've looked at. And also, I should mention, there was an exhibition called Frida Kahlo's Garden at the New York Botanical Gardens. And you can go online and find images and references to it there. But it is very different to look at her interpretation of nature and Rivera's interpretation of nature. I should also mention that that exhibition in New York City at the Botanical Gardens of her garden drew more people than the exhibition at, I think it was at MoMA of Monet's garden. And I was always surprised by that. I thought, oh, everybody loves the water lilies and nobody really knows about Kahlo's garden, but proved wrong as people in New York City and from around the world flocked to see the recreation of her garden and her garden pictures.
yeah, we'll include, so a couple of you are asking about copies of the presentation. We always send out a recording so you can look at the slides again. We'll include links to this, to the Botanical Garden exhibit. Several of you are asking about Frida's clothes. And you know, she, as you could see from Wendy's discussion, she was really interested in clothing, especially clothing from Oaxaca. I have my huipil, my Oaxacan huipil on today. And so there was a big exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum of Art last year, I think, about that. So I can include a link to that. So we'll include all of this for you. Sorry, I'm getting excited and talking too fast. So let me get to these, let me get to these questions. A few people are asking for a reading list, and we will get that out to you. We do have several questions about, Wendy, about the double portrait. So I'll group all those together. Let me start with a couple of single questions, and then we'll get to this group of questions about the double portrait. Nettie asks, was she successful in selling her art?
During her lifetime, she did sell. She was always, well, first she was not well known, and then she was always second to De Vera. Now she sells, you know, her works are through the ceiling. But you know what? I don't know if I've ever actually spent a lot of time looking at the success during her own lifetime, knowing only that, you know, most recently we saw one of her works go, it was the most expensive painting by a Mexican artist ever done. And we've seen, I know for sure across my lifetime, from the time I first learned about, actually I studied Rivera and I learned about Kahlo on the side. We've seen the reversal of sort of who's considered the greatest Mexican painter of their day. I wish I could give you more details about sales during her lifetime. I know she sold, but how well is not something I can answer offhand. I'll try to find something, and as I've been trying to do in some of the notes, I'll try to put some links into a place that you can find the answer to that question. Melanie, do you know much about her sales?
You know, I don't really. I feel like it's something I've read about in preparation for trips and stuff, but at the moment cannot recall. I am sorry. But
Yeah,
we'll
no.
get this info to you. So Wendy asks, referring to the photograph of her painting in bed, was she back in a cast medically later in life, or did she create the cast for the art of it? So Wendy, you had that picture of her painting in the body
Yeah, no,
cast.
her injuries were so extensive from that crash when she was 18, that we know that she was constantly dealing with medical personnel. Many of her paintings she dedicates to doctors who tried to help her with chronic pain. And the body cast wasn't just an artifice. She was in it because she had, as I think I said during my talk, she had broken her pelvis in 3 places and her spine in 3 places. And I'm sure many of us who are listening today know something about what happens as you age and you have broken bones and arthritis sets in and pain multiplies. And so she was put into the body cast. It wasn't just, like I said, an artistic thing. It was a medical procedure. But I love the fact that she painted them. And I mentioned that the Art Gallery of Ontario a few years ago had an exhibition of her work, and it was the first one I think I did a tour of, and my love of Frida grew greater from appreciating the paintings versus just the replicas of them. But looking at the details that she put in on those casts and thinking about her lying there and in pain and not able to walk and not able to go out, but not willing to just say, you know, this is my life and I've got to live with it, but to decorate it and say, you know, I'm in control and I will make it and I will have it say what I want it to say and not just what the doctors want it to say. Like, first off, the ingenuity in that. And second off, the celebration of not her death, but her life. Like, I'm going to use this too, is remarkable. And like I said, we had a few of the casts there and they were, you know, heart-wrenching in some ways, with references to one of the things I didn't mention, because I'm afraid sometimes we too often read only autobiography into her works, but as a result of the accident, she wasn't able to ever have children. And one of them, I remember heartbreakingly, had a little fetus in it with her hope that she could somehow conceive, if not physically through her artwork. But I also remember all like the colors and the, you know, there was a celebration there. So it is a beautiful way of, like I said, taking control of something that was put upon her and of making it beautiful.
So let's go to some of these questions about the double portrait. Wendy, if you could go back to that.
Let me see if I can pull it up here. I apologize for what I'm about to do. Actually, I'm not. It's such beautiful pictures. I'm getting there. Melanie, do you want to read the question while I pull it up?
Sure. Let me thanks. Let me start on these questions. So there's a couple questions about what she's holding in her hands, whether they're surgical clamps or scissors or daggers. I think she's holding two different things, if I remember. So one hand, it looks like one hand is holding either scissors or surgical clamps, and then the other hand, I don't know what, I cannot actually see what that is.
A shell. I think it's a shell that she's holding. And again, you know, this is a work that's well worth spending lots of time looking at for all its significance. So yeah, you do have the surgical clamps that are there. You see the artery, the two hearts, I think is fascinating, and looking at some of the differences, the density of one heart and the revealing of the organs in the other heart. And then, yeah, there's this shell. And I have to tell you, there are lots of scholars out there who try to decode every element and aspect of her painting, considering her not a surrealist, but considering her a symbolist. So everything has a deeper meaning. And I know I remember reading about the shell and that the shell was somehow related to Aztec culture. It was something that was highly valued in that tradition. So again, you see kind of the differences between these two worlds, the two people she could become, her ability to try to integrate them, but also to know that, you know, she couldn't. I mean, I think those clamps are there for a particular purpose, whether it's she has to sever them or she has to find some way to tie them together. It's that challenge of identity, being more than one person. You know, we used to call it multiple personality disorder. I love the fact that it's now dissociative personality disorder, recognizing that all of us have at least two of us inside ourselves, if not more than that. One thing, as I'm looking at the image back on our screen in front of us, that I haven't noticed is look all along the bottom at the flowers in her more European dress. I wish I could get a closer look at what they are, but I bet they're roses, to also kind of harken back to that tradition. And it was a tradition of her feeling like she was pulled into two directions, as Europe called and the art world called, but also very much, you know, her own tradition. We saw that great portrait, my grandparents, my parents, and I. And in it, you saw her European grandparents, whose picture is over the ocean, and you see her Mexican grandparents, whose images are over the land. And so this is something, this pull, this divide that she felt, and her constant struggle with it. I think you see it echoed over and over again. And I do think you see it in the garden, where she still has some of the you know, the roses that were planted, where she still keeps some of the ferns and the palms that her father planted, but tries to integrate with them more indigenous or native plants from Mexico. Yeah, I guess I'm just totally fascinated with her constant mediation of that problem of identity, and the way she keeps trying to work it out, you know, with paint and with plants.
We have a kind of a comment from Sheila that relates to what you're saying, Wendy, but about her. Another part of her pain was this identity pull, Wendy, as you were saying, between being a Mexican of European extract and Mexican of indigenous extract, because her mom was mestiza, I believe. And then talking about how her favorite clothes, like, were from these some of these indigenous peoples of Mexico.
Yeah. So all those kind of conflicts, both from Europe and Mexico, and then within Mexican culture itself.
Okay. Oh yes, you know, it's hard to see on the it's hard to see. Ida is saying in this double portrait, it's actually not a shell. It's a mini portrait of Diego Rivera.
Huh. I hadn't heard about that, but I will try to blow it up and take a closer look and get some curators. I'd always heard it was a shell, but thank you, Ida.
Yeah,
I will track down that reference.
Sharon asks, is there a significance in one heart being open or revealed and the other closed?
I think so. I don't know if I'd use open and revealed, but there's the density of one. I'm going to just to switch the words a little bit. You know, the fullness of the heart, it's not exposed so much. I guess I'm thinking through your question as we look at the image itself. And you know what? I have to think that the fullness of that heart, you know, had something to do with her grounding in Mexico, her belief that it was there, and feeling so exposed when she did go to Europe. You know, she was unusual because she was a woman painter. Here she was a celebrated painter. Here she was on the cover of Vogue and the cover of painting magazines and kind of the talk of the town. And I guess I understand, you know, it must have felt like her organs being revealed to her. That's me thinking through the painting. You know, it's funny, every time I look at it, I see something that I missed before, you know, and I keep coming back to this work and I keep coming back to this work. And, you know, it's everything from the way the eyes look and the height of her cheekbones are so different. I mean, there's so much that are different in these two images, but I kind of constantly am thinking about what it must have been like for her to be in Paris and then be back at home in Mexico, and what those differences were. So thank you. It's a really good question, and one that deserves more thought and more time. I'm going to, by the way, use that question when a little bit later for Classical Pursuits. I'm doing a session on 20th century women painters, and we'll have time to look at these images in greater detail. So thank you for the question. That's my thinking at the moment. I'm going to do some more research, and I'll try to get back to you.
Okay, we just have a couple more questions, and then we will wrap it up. Brian asks, who was the child in the painting that, or sorry, in the photo that you showed of her with the easel that she has in bed? She has the easel propped up against her knees, and there's a child standing there.
I think that was a neighborhood child. She was so well loved by her community that people would come in and out of her house and cared for her. I've never seen any reference to her to that child being somebody specific to her life. Definitely wasn't, she herself never had children, much to her great sorrow. So I think it was just somebody from the neighborhood who had come to spend time with her. I think how much she was loved by the community and how much she was part of her community, it often gets overlooked now. It was kind of far removed from her death, but she was mourned. Like, the streets were lined. You can go online and see so many photographs of her very public funeral. And I think that's who it is. I'm sorry, Brian, I've never seen any other reference to whether that was somebody specific in her life or not.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. Oh, I just lost the question. Oh, but a couple people are asking about the diaries. Are they in Spanish? Mostly they are. But I think, Wendy, you have that's one of the more recent translations, right? If I'm not mistaken.
It is. I'm hoping you can see this. My screen is on some other images. This is her diary, and it is a relatively new publication. I did check today to make sure it is still available. And one of the reasons I love it is, yeah, it was originally written, her words are in Spanish. But the great thing that this particular edition does is it does the English translations at the back. So you have a chance to try to follow through on some of the words that she has. And it has some really insightful commentary on the images and where some of the images would come from. So yeah, the front part is her beautiful painted diary, and the back part is the translation and some discussion about the art. As I mentioned, I think it's one of my most kind of treasured possessions because she paints with such joy throughout these works, and lots of images. I showed you a few of landscapes and little tiny drawings of animals that populated her life. And to be able to see the artist at work, it is an amazing thing. She writes about her painting. She writes about her relationships. It's not always easy. There's lots of lists, but well worth taking time to look at if you're interested in trying to figure out not only what she did on the canvas, but what she was thinking more broadly.
We'll put a link to that book in the handout as well. Two final questions. One is from Sarah. Sarah, I think I need a little more clarification, so I'll ask that and let Wendy get started on looking for it. Can you talk about Picasso earrings in the photo and painting? Does that ring a bell for you, Wendy?
It isn't off the top. We see the hands often.
Yeah. Sarah, could you give us a little more info about specifically which painting you mean? And then Seth asks, so while Sarah is doing that, Seth asks, are there any portraits of Frida smiling?
Well, what a good question. She smiles in the photo. You see the one that I have here. We see smiles in her photos, but does she smile in her portraits? Google project and culture program has a great site up. It's an extensive look at Kahlo's work called The Faces of Frida. It includes all kinds of curation and videos. It's quite a magnificent example of what we can do in terms of looking at art and an artist in an online environment. And I went there because they do have all the self-portraits lined up. And you know what? I don't think we have a portrait of her smiling. I can't think of a single time I saw even a glimmer of teeth, which is kind of interesting because we do definitely see her smiling and we see her laughing in photographs. Great question, to which I have no quick answer, but I can send you, we'll include that link so that you can go and take a look for yourself. And you know what's interesting is she understood the importance of laughter. That's why I kind of was interested in looking at her gardens, as I said throughout, is I wanted to give us a different side of Kahlo. And one of the things that she wrote was this: nothing is worth more than laughter. It is the strength to laugh and to abandon oneself, to be light. Tragedy is the most ridiculous thing. Now, when I first read that, I was sort of taken aback and I thought, okay, this must be misattributed because it doesn't sound like a Kahlo at all. And I couldn't help but think, as you asked that question, about that quote that, you know, I'll read it one more time. Nothing is worth more than laughter. It is strength to laugh and to abandon oneself, to be light. Tragedy is the most ridiculous thing. And so funny, you know, how rarely I think we see her laughter, except through the plants, you know, and through the celebration of color. I do get a sense of something light. And, you know, it's like those dragonflies in that self-portrait with the thorn necklace. You know, the dragonflies, when you look at them, you go, dragonflies. And then you look closely and they have, you know, heads of flowers on them. That there is a joyful and a whimsical side to Kahlo's work that we often kind of brush over. Anyways, that's my long answer to your question, that I don't think we have a smiling Frida in any of the self-portraits. And that's funny, like I said, because her own recognition of the importance of laughter in that context.
Yeah, or at least not smiling, like, not like smiling.
Yeah, we don't get teethy smiles. We might get a gentle, we get smirks. We do get smirks, but I'm not sure a full-on smile.
So Sarah did clear up her question, and this will be our final question for today. So Sarah's saying the earrings from Picasso are hands.
Yeah,
I don't know, Sarah, if you meet these earrings in the picture right now, and did she have a relationship with Picasso? I don't think so.
I don't think that she met Picasso when she was in Paris. I don't remember reading in the biographies that I've looked at, but for sure she would have been, she was in Paris at the time that, you know, he would have been all the rage. And we see elements and aspects of his ideas. I often think in the background, there's almost like cubist elements in her work. I can't even think, what a good question you asked, because I can't think of a study on Kahlo and Picasso. So maybe at the beginning of a book there, or an essay, or for sure some reflections. She was so caught up with the Surrealists at the time. I'm not sure about the influence of Picasso. You know where I see it? I think it's Sarah who's asking the question. Mm-hmm. Some of the images he does of animals remind me of some of the images you find in Picasso's work. They're almost cartoon-like little drawings. Picasso during his kind of primitivism period. But Yeah, great question. And like I said, you may have the beginning of something here.
All right. Well, we will wrap it up for today. Just several nice comments for you, Wendy. Bobby, who actually lives in Mexico, says she and her niece love your passion. And several other people, they're so excited to learn about a different side of Frida. Really love the presentation and all the color and this kind of new take that you've shown us. So thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you to everyone who has attended. As I mentioned, this is the last of the garden series, but Wendy will be back, I believe, in late June, talking about more about nature and paintings. We'll have those webinars up as soon as they're ready. And next week, I am talking about the war that used up words, literature in Paris from 1910 to 1940. So our free webinar series, our free Thursday series will continue. Please come back next week and check us out online, Worldwide Quest, Classical Pursuits. We have a lot more in store for you. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.